Tosca by Giacomo Puccini. That splendid, commanding theme, which represents the menacing presence of Baron Scarpia, chief of the Roman secret police, hints at one of the reasons for the immense popularity of Puccini's Tosca. And that is its dramatic power. But there are at least half a dozen well-documented reasons for the immense success and durability of this great opera, and to those we're going to add a few of our own. First, it is a terrific story. Set in what filmmakers would call some great locations, three of Rome's most majestic buildings, at a time of immense historical turmoil, the age of Napoleon. It concerns flesh-and-blood characters living thrilling lives against equally spectacular historical and topographical backgrounds. Second, it is great theatre. Puccini was maybe the supreme theatrical craftsman among composers. He turns every screw, including a variation on the thumbscrew, to heighten our emotional involvement in the drama. Third, it is fabulous music. Listen to these clips and see if you don't think them among the most glorious melodies ever written for the human voice. Cavaradossi's strange harmony of contrasts. Tosca's Vici d'arte. And Cavaradossi again with his E lucevan le stelle. In due course, as promised, we shall add a few more reasons for the popularity of Tosca, as if a great story, great settings and wonderful tunes weren't enough. But first, we want to look at Puccini's career and his place in the history of opera. Italy's greatest operatic composer was Giuseppe Verdi, born 1813 and died 1901. Germany's greatest opera composer was Richard Wagner, born by a happy coincidence also in 1813 and died 1883. Wagner's spiritual successor was Richard Strauss. Verdi's was Giacomo Puccini. Purists will argue that neither successor was truly worthy of his great master, but the fact is that both Strauss and Puccini wrote operas which the public adores. This is especially true of Puccini. No opera company can survive without him. Tosca, Madama Butterfly, and above all La Bohème are the staples of any opera company's diet. Puccini was born in Tuscany, in the town of Lucca, in 1858, and came from a long line of church musicians. This would not prevent him, as we shall see in a moment, from adopting the then fashionable jaundiced view of the clergy. He began his career, however, as a church organist. He must have been caught up in his boyhood by tales of the impassioned movement for Italian unity we now call the Risorgimento, as the various states which made up the Italian peninsula struggled for independence against the forces of reaction, represented by the Austrian occupation and by the Papal States. For the Pope was a major political force until 1870, when Rome fell to Garibaldi, and the Papal States shrank to a few acres of suburban Rome called the Vatican State. It was in the 1870s, 1876 to be exact, that an event occurred which changed the direction of the young church organist's career. He heard Aida in a performance at Pisa, and that decided him to seek entry to the Milan Conservatory, the mecca of aspiring Italian composers. This he eventually succeeded in doing in 1880, and he studied there for 3 years. Like his great predecessor Verdi, and most other composers as well, his earliest attempts at writing major operas were not successful. But with Manon Lescaut, first produced in Turin in February 1893, he achieved a smash hit. Many of his later operas would have mixed, even controversial receptions, but there was no doubting the success of Manon Lescaut. It gave him international fame. Bernard Shaw, who wrote music criticism under the odd pen name of Corno di Bassetto, recognized Puccini's merit when he wrote of the London premiere, "Puccini looks to me more like the air of Verdi than any of his rivals." The ardency of his writing for the tenor voice was already evident in Manon Lescaut. Here is a reminder of that quality in the aria Donna non vidi mai. And while we may smile at the geographical solecism which has Manon Lescaut die in the parched deserts of Louisiana, we have to admire the skill and poignancy of her last great aria, Sola perduta abbandonata. La Bohème followed and did not enjoy the initial success of Manon Lescaut, perhaps because people were expecting to hear a traditionally romantic, tragic opera and were thrown by La Bohème's mix of tragedy, comedy and social comment, all delivered in a conversational style. We find that initial coolness incomprehensible now, as we respond to the superb romanticism of Rodolfo's aria in praise of Mimi's famous and tiny frozen hand. The love duet which follows virtually encapsulates all that is most romantic in musical theatre. And the brainless gaiety of Musetta is a metaphor for all the flirts with hearts of gold, without whom opera houses would be duller places. So if we jump ahead a bit and say that the opera after next was Madame Butterfly, and that Tosca came in between these two pillars of the operatic repertoire, it is clear that Tosca was written by a master of the art form at the very peak of his powers. Just to fill in the picture, we should note that the remaining 25 years of Puccini's career would not produce again such a string of hits. La Fanciulla del West, his Wild West opera, La Rondine, his only operetta, and the Tritico, or triple bill of Il Tabarro, Suor Angelica and Giannischicchi all have their admirers, but none has the box office power of La Bohème or Tosca. It is only a posthumous work, Turandot, that shows the master regaining his power to captivate and move a vast public. I hate to do this to you, but to fully appreciate the action of Tosca, we need a short history lesson. Not one that follows the complicated ebb and flow of republican versus royal and papal occupations of Rome, not a detailed exegesis of European politics around 1800, the year in which the action is set, but one which sets the vitally important political backdrop of the action. The year, as we have noted, is 1800. Rome had previously and briefly been a republic, but has now been recaptured by the royalist forces of the Bourbon kings of Naples. This dynasty has had a bad press, and it is always held up as an example of right-wing repression and reaction. In our story, the forces of the left are represented by Napoleon, still a highly successful general, son of the French Revolution, and not yet self-promoted to emperor. The use of the terms left-wing and right-wing is not inappropriate, as the division of the political spectrum into left-wing and right-wing dates from the position of parties in the National Assembly formed during the French Revolution. General Bonaparte, representing for our purposes revolution, liberty, and anti-clericalism, is sweeping down through Italy, heading for Rome. Naturally, the chief of police, Baron Scarpia, an employee of the Bourbons, and the clergy, represented by the sacristan, are violently opposed to Napoleon and all his works. Cavaradossi, our tenor hero and a painter by profession, is, like most artists, of the left wing. In that fact lies the political mainspring of the opera's action. A frequent matter of confusion can be laid to rest here. In Act 1, news arrives that Napoleon has been defeated, stopped in his tracks, and defeated at Marengo. This gives rise to the great Te Deum we shall hear presently. The news is mistaken. The Battle of Marengo is a victory for Napoleon, as we learn in Act 2. And this gives rise to Cavaradossi's great cries of Vittoria, Vittoria! Victory, victory. Opera is not history, and both the original playwright, Victorien Sardou, whose play La Tosca is the basis of the opera, and Puccini's browbeaten librettists took liberties, condensing action and simplifying things. But the opera is more firmly grounded in fact than almost any other you could name, and in that lies, for many people, further reason to be intrigued by this work. Trivia buffs might like to learn that it is the only opera where historical starting time can be defined to the minute. 5 minutes into the opera, the sacristan recites the Angelus, so the action opens at 5 minutes to noon. Assuming it took 2 days for the erroneous news of Napoleon's defeat at Marengo to reach Rome, and the Battle of Marengo took place on June the 14th, 1800, a Thursday, we can conclude that the opening of Tosca happens at 11:55 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, June the 16th, 1800. A similar specificity can be applied to the location of the opera. Puccini sets Act 1 in the church of Sant'Andrea della Valle, St. Andrew in the Valley, then and now one of the most spectacular Baroque churches of Rome. Act 2 is set in the Palazzo Farnese, then the Neapolitan Embassy, now the French Embassy. And it would almost be possible to throw your hat out the back door of Sant'Andrea and have it land on the doorstep of that grandest of Roman palazzi. Act 3 takes place a mile or so away on top of what classical scholars call the Tomb of Hadrian, and all the rest of us call the Castel Sant'Angelo, the castle of the holy angel Michael, whose statue, sheathing his sword, dominates the setting for the last act. This massive structure has been in its time an emperor's tomb, a papal fortress, a palace, a prison, a museum, and a tourist attraction. Truly, this is the most Roman opera of them all. We talked about the political mainspring of the opera. Let's look at the emotional one. That is, of course, the eternal love triangle. Cavaradossi, the painter, loves Tosca, who in life and in art is an opera singer by profession. She is lusted after by the bad Baron Scarpia, and her easily aroused jealousy will enable him to manipulate her to his political and bestial advantage. Incidentally, both Cavaradossi and Tosca were real-life characters, though the events of the opera are largely imagined. Baron Scarpia, oddly, in many ways the most lifelike of the three, is a creature of Sadou's notoriously overheated imagination. I say overheated because Victorien Sardou was a playwright immensely popular in the Victorian age whose contrived plots and bodice-ripping action have caused him to fade from the legitimate theatrical scene, though he does live on in the opera house, where such qualities are not only tolerated, but required. The secondary character, Angelotti, was another real-life character, and he really had been consul of the now-defunct Roman Republic. He's also said to have been a swindler and a bad lot, but has been sanitized for operatic purposes, as have many others in operatic history. One account has him falling foul of Emma, Lady Hamilton. Emma, wife of the British ambassador to Naples, Sir William Hamilton, and mistress of Admiral Lord Nelson, had been a London call-girl in earlier days. Angelotti remembered being a client, and less than tactfully reminded the great lady of that remembrance at her husband's dinner table. Fanciful though the story is, we know that Sir William Hamilton and Lord Nelson supported the corrupt Bourbons. So there is a probable cause to explain why Angelotti should be persona distinctly non grata with the Bourbons. Puccini is on record as attaching especial importance to the opening bars of his operas, and his closings, believing perhaps that it was important to make a strong first and last impression. Each opens with what the composer called motivo di prima intenzione. Theme of first statement might best convey the idea. He wrote to one of his long-suffering, because much bullied, librettists, "The difficulty is how to begin an opera. That is, how to find its musical atmosphere. Once the opening is fixed and composed, there is no more to fear." In his first great hit, Manon Lescaut, the job of the opening bars is to suggest the bustle of a great square at the gates of Paris, with vendors, coaches arriving, and all the comings and goings of a public space. In the opening bars of Madame Butterfly, he brilliantly sketches the preparations atop the hill in Nagasaki as Goro makes ready the house for Lieutenant Pinkerton's wedding. In La Bohème, it is the rough and tumble of undergraduate life which inspires him. In Tosca, it is that terrifying theme we heard at the beginning, which so brilliantly captures the belligerent power and menace of Scarpia, head of the Roman secret police. This is immediately followed by the breathless, frenetic theme of the escaped political prisoner, Angelotti, as he bursts into the church seeking refuge. Listen how brilliantly Puccini depicts his stumbling, exhausted steps. Angelotti is the former consul of the defeated Roman Republic, and therefore a foe of Scarpia, who has had him imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo. Angelotti has escaped. He has a sister, the Marchesa Attavanti, a blonde, and that's important to remember. She has left a disguise and other supplies for her brother in the family chapel, and he finds the key and ducks into the chapel as the funny old sacristan arrives. He is a marvellous character, part janitor, part church functionary, a reactionary who deplores artists, liberals, and glamorous women. His character is deftly sketched in his first entry by a hoppity-skip sort of tune, as he grumbles about the mess of brushes and paints Cavaradossi leaves around. Depicting the sacristan as this rather foolish, bumbling figure, of course, is just a reflection of the fashionable anti-clerical views to which Verdi was an impassioned subscriber and Puccini a lesser adherent. When the sacristan is reciting the Angelus, the painter Mario Cavaradossi comes in, asks what he's doing, and when he learns the sacristan is praying, shrugs dismissively. In that prayer, and the reaction, we learn all we need to know about the political views of this pair. When Cavaradossi pulls back the cover on the painting of the Maddalena, he reveals a gorgeous blonde. Even the sacristan recognizes her as the woman who has come regularly to pray, and, as we know, but they don't, to hide the key and disguise for her brother, Angelotti. Cavaradossi has the first of his two lovely arias called Recondita Armonia. Difficult phrase to translate, maybe bizarre harmony conveys it, as the painter contrasts the blonde beauty of the painting with his own lovely but darker-complexioned Tosca. And over the grumbles of the disapproving sacristan, he continues to sing of the strange harmony of contrasts, another popular translation of the aria's title, as he ends the aria with a ringing confirmation that Tosca sei tu, Tosca, you are the one for me. The sacristan has spotted the painter's picnic basket and rather covets it, setting it aside for future consumption. Then we have a short scene in which Cavaradossi encounters and recognizes Angelotti. This scene is interrupted by the arrival of the glamorous Floria Tosca, opera singer, fashionable woman of the world, and insanely jealous lover of Cavaradossi. Like all Puccini heroines, why I don't know, it is merely a Puccini hallmark, she is heard off stage before she is seen. But what an entrance! Just be aware of the components of this entry to see how marvellously and economically Puccini had mastered his craft. Off stage, the voice of Tosca calling, "Mario, Mario." His resigned, indulgent maybe, "Son qui," I'm here. An exquisitely floated flute phrase, alluring, sensual, and deeply feminine. Yet the jealous suspicion of Tosca's "Perché chiuso?" Why is the door locked? And the reply, because the sacristan wanted it locked. Again, thanks to Puccini's mastery of his craft, we know a vast amount about the relationship of these two people in a matter of seconds. The long love scene that follows is passion, punctuated by moments of jealousy and suspicion on Tosca's part. First, here she is proposing a meeting that night after she has sung her concert. When Tosca sees the painting of the Maddalena, she recognizes it as the Marchesa at Avanti, and immediately assumes Cavaradossi is having an affair with her. He calms her suspicions about this blue-eyed beauty by asking whose eyes could possibly rival those of the divine Tosca, a sentiment which she refulgently echoes in one of those soaring, heart-lifting phrases that are another hallmark of Puccini. But in a delightful parting phrase, Tosca, charming, still slightly suspicious and determined, turns to the portrait of the blonde Maddalena and says, "Mi fa gli occhi neri." Make the eyes dark, like mine. And leaves the stage as graciously as she had entered it. You can see already why Tosca is a role so devoutly coveted among sopranos. She is a multifaceted character. She has fire, tenderness, jealousy, intense loyalty, and she gets to wear some great frocks. You can also see why Maria Callas was able to make this her signature role, as it sharply mirrored her own passionate and troubled life. Another scene now for Cavaradossi and Angelotti, as Cavaradossi gives him the food that's in the picnic basket, and tells him to make his way out of the church to Cavaradossi's villa and to hide in a safe place, in a well in the garden. They leave as the sacristan bursts onto the scene with the, for him, good news, later proved erroneous, that Napoleon has been defeated at Marengo. He is joined by the choristers, who have a scene of great jubilation as they plan a Te Deum, a thanks be to God for the supposed victory.
Bonaparte, scellerato, Bonaparte! Uspenato, sfracellato, e piumato e Belzebù. E verriti con perdona. Ora ne giunge la notizia.
Festeggia la vittoria.
E questa sera, gran fiacolata, velia di Galla Palazzo Farnese. Ed una musica nuova cantata con furia Tosca.
Then we have what must be one of the great coups de théâtre in all opera. As the cavortings and gleeful riotings of the choristers reach fever pitch, Scarpia enters, with that theme you heard at the beginning of the prelude. And the way in which jubilation turns to menace and deep dread in about 3 seconds tells us all we need to know about the art of music theatre. Un tal baccano in chiesa, bel rispetto. Such a shindig in church, some respect, barks the dread figure of the chief of the Roman secret police, Baron Scarpia. And instantly we are pitched back into the dark world of papal politics. There is a long incident now when Scarpia interrogates the terrified sacristan and deduces from a number of clues, including the now empty picnic basket, that his quarry has indeed been here, but has escaped, perhaps in company with that left-wing painter, Cavaradossi. Tosca now enters, and Scarpia uses another prop, a fan with the Marchesa Attavanti's crest on it, to sow the suspicion in Tosca's receptive mind that Cavaradossi is having an affair with the blonde of the painting. He also does some ineffectual leching of his own. As she leaves, he sets 3 of his agents to follow her, believing that Tosca will lead them to Cavaradossi, who will in turn lead them to Angelotti. We then have a splendid scene to conclude the first act, and in many ways it encapsulates much that is fascinating in the Italian character and all that is best in grand opera. Again, the setting is superb, the great Baroque church of Sant'Andrea. As the scene progresses, the vast church, second tallest in Rome after St. Peter's, begins to fill, first with simple parishioners. Gradually, we absorb the full pageantry of the Catholic Church, with priests, acolytes, senior clergy, a cardinal even, supported by all the pomp and circumstance of a great church occasion: bells, cannons, organ, canopies, monstrances, more bells, candles, smells and bells, pongs and gongs, the lot. While this magnificent pageantry is going on upstage, to the greater glory of God, the pious and hypocritical Scarpia is downstage, singing, "Va, Tosca, go, Tosca. Before long your lover will be hanging from the gallows, and you'll be in my arms." This is a stunning combination of sin and sanctity, and one of the most memorable scenes in all opera. Let's hear how it starts and begins to gain momentum.
Tosca, da Scarpia. Tosca. Le Scarpia che sceglie la falco della tua gelosia. Quanta promessa nel tuo pronto sospetto. Nel tuo cuore s'annida Scarpia. Va, Tosca.
And the great scene which ends the first act reaches its climax when Scarpia, almost carried away by bloodlust and the other kind, cries out, "Tosca, mi fai dimenticare il Dio. Tosca, you make me forget God," drops on one knee and crosses himself as the great choirs, organ and orchestra thunder out the medieval hymn of praise. It's enough to make a fellow commit adultery and convert in the same breath. Act 2 is set about 2 blocks away, and 10 hours later, in the Palazzo Farnese, the immense palace designed in part by Michelangelo for the wealthy and formerly powerful Florentine family of the Medici. Scarpia has his office there, and as the curtain rises, he is musing alone on his plan to hang Cavaradossi and bed Tosca. His henchman Spoletta enters with bad news. They found the villa, but no Angelotti, which earns Spoletta a tongue-lashing, though Scarpia is somewhat mollified to learn they have arrested Cavaradossi. The sense of terror this scene evokes almost makes you sympathise with the Weasley Spoletta, and notice how insidiously Puccini uses his orchestra to underscore the menace of the discussion.
O galantuomo, correndo la caccia.
Mignazzo m'aiuta. Della signora seguimo la traccia. Giuntiamo un'erba viletta tra le fratte perduta. E l'avventrò. Ne uscì solamente presto. Allora si abbatte il lesto il muro del giardino coi miei cagnotti. E piombo in casa.
Quel bravo Spoletta.
Fiuto, razzo, rogo.
Angelotti,
Si è trovato.
a fare a traditore, certo di basilisco, alle forche.
C'era il pittore.
Cavaradossi,
E sa dove l'altro s'asconde, ogni suo gesto, ogni accento tradiata, beffarda ironia, ch'io lo trassi in arresto.
meno male.
It's hard to hear, but when Spoletta is threatened at the beginning of the incident, he mutters, "St. Ignatius, help me." So it might be relevant to note that the office of the Carabinieri in Rome is directly across the road from the church of St. Ignatius, prompting the thought that the founder of the Jesuit order may also be the patron saint of the police. There is a scene now in which Cavaradossi is brought in and interrogated, as Tosca, the opera singer, sings in a cantata off stage for the Queen. Partway through, Scarpia slams the window shut, cutting off the sound of the cantata to concentrate on the real business of interrogation. Listen as he asks Cavaradossi where Angelotti is, if he assisted him, gave him food, and so on. And listen also to Cavaradossi's bravely defiant cries of, "Nego, I deny it." But the really nasty stuff is still to come, and it reminds us that many critics have taken a dim view of Puccini's apparent interest in torture and suffering for theatrical effect. Liu's torture in Turandot is, to say the least, gratuitous. Butterfly's self-evisceration unnecessarily graphic. Now enter the silent characters of the judge, who will take Cavaradossi's confession, and Roberti, the burly executioner, who will assist in extracting it. Tosca has come in from her concert, and Cavaradossi has barely had time to tell her to say nothing before he is hustled off to the torture chamber. The refinement of torture in this scene is mental, because while Cavaradossi is off stage, having a spiked iron band tightened about his temples, Tosca is on stage, being ruthlessly interrogated against the background cries of her lover's torment. Listen as Scarpia calls for the doors to the torture chamber to be opened, as the screw of tension is viciously tightened, both literally and musically, until the demented Tosca can bear it no longer. She reveals Angelotti's hiding place. And when the half-crazed Cavaradossi is brought on bleeding and broken, Scarpia wickedly lets on that she has talked. Mario Cavaradossi denounces Tosca, but is interrupted by the arrival of an agent who reverses the earlier news and says Napoleon has won the battle at Marengo. The politically liberal Cavaradossi summons his strength, and over Tosca's punctuating appeals for discretion, not the strong suit of anyone in this opera, sings his great cry of victory, and his short hymn of praise to the triumph of liberty. It is a great moment for a tenor, as he gets to hang on to the notes longer than dictated by good taste, again not a strong suit in this opera.
Alba vendicia par, che agli enti tremar, i
Cavaradossi was dragged away at the end of that extract, leaving Tosca in the clutches of Scarpia, ready to face death, or maybe, as the Victorians would say, a fate worse than death. Briefly, what happens next is that Tosca asks the price of Cavaradossi's freedom, and Scarpia tells her the price is not to be paid with her money, but with her body. She is appalled, not just because she is a good Catholic girl, as we shall be reminded in a moment, and not only because she is in love with Cavaradossi, but also because Scarpia is a pig, and an ugly pig at that. Listen as Scarpia tells Tosca that at that very moment they are building the scaffold. Listen for the rumble of the drums, in that age of terror, the always present accompaniment to the scaffold.
Odi, al tamburo, s'avvia, guida la scorta, ultima e condannati. Il tempo passa, sai quale oscura opera laggiù si compia. Là si drizza un pativo. Mario, per tuo voler, non resta che un'ora di vita.
Tosca's response is one of the most celebrated soprano arias in the entire repertoire. The Vici d'arte, vici d'amore. I have lived for art, I have lived for love. Read cold on the paper, it can look maudlin. She sings how she never did anyone any harm, has prayed to the Madonna, how she has given money to the poor, and generally led the good life. Warming to her theme, she reminds us how she has given jewels to decorate the mantle of the Madonna, and gets to her punchline, "So why me, Lord? Perché me ne remuneri così? Why do you reward me so?" The sentiments may be self-pitying, but the simple elegance of the vocal line, coming in the midst of torture, menace, and threatened rape, makes a tremendous theatrical impact, and the aria is justifiably a showstopper. We learn now that Angelotti has killed himself rather than fall into Scarpia's hands. and Scarpia gives orders for the corpse to be hung in chains and for Cavaradossi to be hanged alongside him. Unless Tosca will agree to his proposal. Scarpia has one last trick to play, and it will be his last. He says that we must go through at least the appearance of an execution. He instructs Spoletta to arrange a fake execution. Spoletta clearly understands the double meaning of this particular piece of skullduggery, even if Tosca doesn't. Make it look like a fake, but with real bullets. Scarpia will have his moment of lust, and Tosca and Cavaradossi their passport out of Rome and away to freedom. But while Scarpia is writing the passport letter, Tosca goes over to the supper table, and her eye is caught by the sight of a knife. The orchestra even tells us the exact moment she sees it. Scarpia advances on Tosca with a great cry of, "Tosca, finalmente mia! Mine at last!" And she spins round and repeatedly stabs him to cries of, "This is Tosca's kiss."
Tosca, finalmente mia! Maledetta!
Questo è il bacio di Tosca!
Aiuto! Muoio! Soccorso, muoio!
"Muore damnato," she cries. "Die and go straight to hell." The act, which began with the quiet musings of Scarpia in his study, ends with him dead on the floor, as his murderess takes the candles off the table and a crucifix off the wall, places them around and on him, and ceremonially prepares him for his last journey. The last act opens on top of the Castel Sant'Angelo, and the historic grandeur of that building, massed against the coming dawn, is wonderfully evoked by French horns in the orchestra. Indeed, atmospheric scene painting is one of the outstanding aspects of Puccini's genius in this short act. He reminds us, by the presence of a shepherd boy, that Rome was in part a cow town in those years, before it became the capital of Italy. The forum was known as Il Vacchino, the cowpatch. The treble piping of a boy's voice seems to heighten the pre-dawn silence. Listen how, out of the stillness in the orchestra, there rises the wonderful tune, sweet, sad, doom-laden, which will form Cavaradossi's last testament and will accompany Tosca's death. They say that Puccini visited Castel Sant'Angelo before dawn to note the pitches and rhythms of the different bells that greet the dawn, the great bell of St. Peter's and the smaller chimes of the lesser churches. After bribing a jailer to take a letter to Tosca, Cavaradossi sits down to write. In one of the most atmospheric arias in all opera, and one of the great staples of the tenor repertoire, he sings E lucevan le stelle, and the stars were shining, as he recalls the perfumed night of his first meeting with Tosca and of her embrace. Then, in one of those soaring phrases full of longing remembered, he recalls the sweet kisses and the languide carezze, languid caresses. But this dream, this reverie, is of the past. He is facing death and the loss of Tosca at a time, as he sadly remarks at the end of the aria, E non ho amato mai tanto la vita, at a time when I have never loved life more. Tosca comes in now with the great news that Scarpia has given them a passport to freedom, and it is always one of the little mysteries of the piece whether Cavaradossi is as trusting of the arrangement as Tosca is. In any event, when she tells him that she has killed Scarpia with her own little hands, his somewhat surprising reaction is to sing a song to her pure and innocent hands. Tosca fills in the escape plan. She has money, a carriage, and the passport. But with that peculiar sense of operatic priorities, they take 5 minutes for a quick love duet. Cavaradossi begins it, but Tosca takes over with greater fervour as she sings of the love which has won their way to freedom. This duet reaches an exultant conclusion as they sing passionately about how they will be united forever in the holy fire of love. And notice, please, what an act of genius it is to leave the final moment to the two singers, singing a cappella. No orchestral accompaniment intrudes. Sheer genius. The firing squad arrives now as Tosca gives Cavaradossi a few acting tips on how to play dead, just the way they do it in the opera house. The firing squad has its own gloomy little march as Tosca waits impatiently for the so-called mock execution to take place. In due course, she gets her wish. Ecco un artista! What an artist, she exclaims as he falls dead. After the firing squad has marched off, she tells Cavaradossi to lie still and eventually goes over to the body. "Quick, get up! Presto su!" she cries.
Presto su, Maro, Maro, su presto andiamo, su, su, Maro,
Only then does she realize that the hand of Scarpia has reached out from beyond the grave to strike them. She has little time to ponder her choices, as the voices of Spoletta, the secret agent, and his companions rush the stairs, shouting the news that Scarpia has been found dead. She races to the battlements, pursued by Scarpia's men. And, in opera's most notorious and spectacular suicide, calls out to Scarpia, "Avanti a Dio, before God," and launches herself into eternity. And with luck, a couple of stout mattresses. It's interesting and oddly revealing that while Scarpia's name is the last on her lips, the orchestra thunders out in those final moments a repeat of that soulful, lovely tune we heard earlier in the act, and which represents, perhaps, their doomed love. The most famous denunciation of Tosca as an opera described it as a shabby little shocker. A certain kind of snooty critic has always been ready to denounce Puccini for allegedly cheap theatrical effects and for choosing themes which enabled him to manipulate the emotions of his audiences. This, of course, is nonsense. You must have seen in this short introduction how Puccini's unerring sense of what would work in the opera house enabled him to create situations where the drama of the human condition is heightened by the use of music. Surely as good a definition as we need of the meaning of musical theatre. When you add to that theatrical sense an astonishing melodic creativity, you have all the explanation we need for the initial success and enduring popularity of Giacomo Puccini and his Tosca.